This podcast contains descriptions of violence against children and adult language and is not suitable for all audiences. Listener discretion is advised. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Suffer the Little Children, the true crime podcast giving voices back to the victims of child abuse and shining a harsh spotlight on the parents, guardians, and caretakers who silence them. I'm your host, Lane, and this is episode 109, Tesslynn O'Cull, Part 2. Last week, I told you the first part of the story of 3-year-old Tesslynn O'Cull, whose murder in 1997 became known as the worst case of child abuse in Oregon's history. After Tesslynn's battered body was found in a shallow grave, her mother, 21-year-old Stella Kiser, and the woman's live-in boyfriend, 20-year-old Jesse Compton, were charged with murder. This week, I'll tell you the rest of Tesslynn's story, discussing Stella's 2 jury trials, Jesse's attempts to have his conviction and death sentence overturned, and more about who Tesslynn was. You'll also hear my conversation with Tesslynn's maternal uncle, her mother's twin brother, Billy Kiser, who was the only person who intervened to try to save his niece and who still thinks about her every day. This is part 2 of the horrific story of Tesslynn O'Cull. Time for a shout out to my newest patrons, Gracie C. from Sterling, Colorado, Aiden B. from Fort Wayne, Indiana, Shelley K. from Red Wing, Minnesota, and from a galaxy far, far away, thank you to OBG and Simone J. Thank you all so much for your support. Every pledge gets me closer to being able to devote myself full-time to the podcast on a permanent basis, and I can't thank you enough. To make a pledge, you can visit patreon.com/stlcpod. If you follow the podcast on social media, you might have seen my excited fangirling last week. I was recently interviewed by one of my all-time podcast heroes, Bob Ruff of the essential true crime podcast, Truth and Justice with Bob Ruff, for his other show, True Crime Binge, where he introduces his audience to other shows they might not know about yet. Last week, I was the guest on Bob's 80th episode of True Crime Binge, and we talked about my background, my motivation for focusing on children's stories exclusively, and the tragic story of 4-year-old Judah Morgan, who I featured in episodes 87 and 88 of this podcast. To check out my conversation with Bob, you can search True Crime Binge on any podcast platform or visit the website at truecrimebinge.com. Now I'll pick up where I left off last week, which is after Jesse Compton was sentenced to death for Tesslynn's torture, rape, and murder. In Oregon, all death sentences are automatically appealed to the state Supreme Court. In Jesse's case, his automatic death sentence review was submitted in November of 1998. Stella Kiser's trial on charges of aggravated murder, and abuse of a corpse in the second degree began with jury selection on January 19, 1999. Lane County Circuit Judge Pierre von Rieselberg presided. Once a jury of 5 women and 7 men had been seated, opening arguments were given on Friday, January 22nd. During her 5-minute opening statement, defense attorney Dorothy Morey told jurors that her client did not intend for her daughter to be injured. She said Stella came from an abusive home, witnessing her father's suicide at the age of 13, becoming a mother at 16, and using illegal drugs from the time she was a teenager. When Stella moved to Oregon from California, she was trying to better her life. Ms. Morey said a psychologist would testify that Stella suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD, so severe that she could not make her own actions conform to the requirements of the law, which was one legal definition of mental illness that provided an absolute legal defense. This meant, the attorney said, that Stella could not be found guilty of any crime in connection with Tesslynn's death. To ensure acquittal, the defense needed to prove Stella was either unaware of the abuse or guilty but insane. For Stella to be convicted of aggravated murder, the prosecution would have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Stella intentionally aided Jesse Compton in the torture of her 3-year-old daughter. Deputy District Attorney Bob Gorham's opening statement was significantly longer at 30 minutes. Like he did at Jesse's trial, he apologized to the jury for having to show them graphic photos of Teslynn's injuries, but he assured them the photos would prove it was impossible for Stella to claim she wasn't aware of the severe abuse her daughter endured for at least a month. Evidence would show, he said, that Stella actively helped conceal Teslynn's injuries by attempting to treat her at home instead of seeking medical attention, even though they lived directly across the street from a fully equipped fire and emergency medical station. Instead, they dressed her in long sleeves and pants at all times to avoid going to jail. You should look at her ability to make choices. The choices she made to protect her child. The choices she made to protect herself. Ms. Kiser aided Mr. Compton in torturing that child to death. Under Oregon law, the prosecutor reminded the jury, someone who intentionally aided another person in the commission of a crime was also guilty of that crime. While Mr. Gorham spoke, Stella hung her head, quietly sobbing, sniffling, and shaking her head, as if in denial of the accusations he made. After the opening arguments concluded, a half-dozen witnesses testified about the couple's drug parties, their constant use of methamphetamine, and Stella turning over Teslynn's discipline to Jesse. Defense attorney John Callego tried to paint Jesse as a violent, manipulative, domineering bully who tried to prove he was a tough guy by throwing knives into the walls. The same day, Jesse's sister, Lacey Compton, testified about her brother's request that she drive them to the Sweet Home area to bury Teslynn's body. When Lacey testified that Stella and Jesse both told her she would go to prison if she told anyone what they had done, Stella had an outburst in court, shouting, "Jesse told both of us that. She's lying." Stella's attorneys managed to quiet her, and the trial continued without interruption. On the next day of testimony, January 25, 1999, the state put 7 more witnesses on the stand, the testimony of whom seemed at times to overlap and at other times to contradict each other. While witnesses who visited the couple's apartment described Jesse as scary and domineering, they also testified that Stella often stood up to him. Upstairs neighbor David Davis, who often visited the couple, said on the stand, "Jesse would put her down like she was just nothing, a no-good tramp. She would come back with the same thing." Samuel Ruppert, another frequent visitor to the apartment, said of Stella, "She was definitely a fighter." Both men testified about seeing Jesse and Stella together after Tesslynn died, but before her body was found. Mr. Davis said the two appeared to be on a second honeymoon. They were happy, they were outgoing, it didn't seem like anything was bothering them. Mr. Ruppert testified that Stella and Jesse didn't seem to be fighting as much during that time, adding, "Something was different in a positive way." Other witnesses testified that they had seen Stella mistreating Tesslynn by slapping her on the hand or the bottom, yanking her by the arm, pulling her hair, and even neglecting to feed the 3-year-old when she was hungry. One witness, Jennifer McCown, testified that she told Stella she had seen Jesse trying to convince Tesslynn to go to sleep by beating her with a belt, but Stella refused to intervene. She said, "Just let him take care of that." When asked why she didn't report the incident to child protection officials, Jennifer said she didn't know why. Springfield police officer Glenn Patrick also testified that day, telling the court about questioning Stella on May 30, 1997, after her brother reported abuse allegations to the police. It wasn't specifically stated, but I have to assume Officer Patrick was one of the officers who visited the apartment that day and failed to check on Tesslynn, other than peering through the window at her. Officer Patrick testified that Stella convinced him there were no problems in the household, so he didn't insist on going inside. The final witness of the day was Detective John Umenhoffer, who described for the jury the process of unearthing Teslynn's body from a shallow grave hidden beneath the wheel from a car. During the detective's testimony, Stella was notably emotionless, even when he described the items found during a search of the apartment complex's dumpster, which included a Mother's Day card addressed to Stella and strips of cloth with Teslynn's hair wound into the knots. With that, the prosecution rested. The next day, Tuesday, January 26, 1999, after the judge denied a defense motion to acquit, the defense began presenting its case with the testimony of Dr. Stephen Scher, a psychologist and the chairman of the State Psychiatric Security Review Board, which was a panel overseeing the custody, release, and supervision of Oregon's criminally insane convicts. Dr. Scher testified that Stella suffered from PTSD and 2 separate personality disorders as a result of enduring physical and suspected sexual abuse as a child. Also, the psychologist testified, Stella's extreme use of meth further interfered with her ability to perceive and understand her daughter's injuries and take appropriate action. Describing what he had been told of Stella's childhood, Dr. Scher said her father, who was abusive, violent, and threatening, had disowned his children. In that environment, Stella, who began at a young age to fear abandonment and to feel worthless, learned to detach herself from reality. When her father died by suicide, the doctor testified, 13-year-old Stella blamed herself. This memory, which she never let go of, caused ongoing feelings of fear and helplessness that eventually manifested in PTSD. As Stella grew older, Dr. Scher said, her emotional confusion grew into both dependent personality disorder, a cluster C disorder, and borderline personality disorder, a cluster B disorder. Borderline made her perpetually emotionally unstable, anxious, prone to detach from reality, and terrified of abandonment. Stella had been a poor student since kindergarten, according to the psychologist, who said she began drinking at age 11, using marijuana at 13, and using meth at 14. Her existence, he said, was that of an emotional child in a woman's body, describing her as confused, pessimistic, doubtful, discouraged, gloomy, and constantly depressed. Regarding Jesse's treatment of Tesslynn, the doctor said Stella had told him Jesse did not allow her to see Tesslynn during the last 2 weeks of her life, during which the little girl endured brutal sexual abuse, internal bleeding, and other injuries that led to her death. On cross-examination, Prosecutor Gorham challenged Dr. Scher's conclusions by reading aloud Stella's answers to the questions investigators asked her the day she was arrested. During her questioning, Stella made it clear she was aware of the damage Jesse was causing to her daughter and was intentionally trying to avoid being caught and punished for Tesslynn's injuries. As for Stella's claim that she wasn't allowed to see Tesslynn for the last 2 weeks of her life, the prosecutor pointed out that she hadn't mentioned this to anyone other than the psychologist, and in fact, her statements to police indicated she was consciously covering up for Jesse. For example, when Springfield Police Detective Rick Lewis asked her if anyone else had cared for Tesslynn during those 2 weeks, Stella said they hadn't because, "I didn't want them to find out what Jesse had done." Prosecutor Gorham asked Dr. Scher why Stella might choose to protect Jesse, to which the psychologist responded that Stella probably felt threatened that she would lose the man she had become dependent on, as well as losing her child, if police found out that Tesslynn was badly hurt. "I think if she understood the injuries were life-threatening, she may have been able to break through and do something." Regarding Stella's claims that she wasn't aware of Tesslynn's worst injuries, the prosecutor pointed out that Tesslynn's burns were up to 2 months old and in no way could have been missed by anyone who bathed the little girl, which Stella told police she did on a regular basis. How could she have missed them? Dr. Scher suggested it was possible that Stella's own fear and anxiety kept her from understanding just how severe the situation had become. Also on January 26th, the jury heard testimony from Oregon State's Deputy Medical Examiner, Dr. Clifford Nelson, who described in detail the awful injuries Tesslynn suffered before she died. As he did so, Stella hung her head and cried, wiping away tears. Dr. Nelson discussed a pattern of burn injuries on the child's body, some as old as 8 weeks, that he believed were inflicted by a propane torch and had not received medical treatment. Dr. Nelson also noted that Tesslynn had been tied by her ankles and wrists, judging by the raw rings left by the restraints. While he described the savage sexual abuse evidenced by the graphic photos of Tesslynn's body, Stella sobbed openly. Dr. Nelson concluded that none of Tesslynn's injuries alone had caused her death, although some were severe and all of them had caused her terrible pain. As a result of his findings, Dr. Nelson said, he concluded that Tesslynn had died from battered child syndrome. As soon as Dr. Nelson stepped down from the stand, Stella immediately and miraculously regained her composure. The following day, on January 27, 1999, Stella's mother, sister, and niece all testified that they had given Tesslynn a bath about a month before she died, during which they saw no evidence of abuse on her little body. Their testimony conflicted with that of medical experts, who had testified the severe burns Tesslynn suffered were as old as 2 months and would have been impossible to miss by anyone who saw her unclothed. Another defense psychologist, Dr. Vicki Boyd of Seattle, testified to the same effect as the first, saying that Stella's mental issues, as well as her drug use, prevented her from understanding the gravity of the situation and therefore intervening to save her daughter's life. The doctor said that Stella had developed PTSD due to her own severe abuse as a child, and that Stella's lack of self-esteem, intelligence, social skills, and resources made her an easy mark for an abusive partner like Jesse Compton. I'm not sure Ms. Kiser believes it's possible for anyone to care about her. If she thinks nothing of herself, I'm not sure she thought much of her child. Once again, on cross-examination, Prosecutor Gorham challenged the doctor's findings by calling attention to Stella's videotaped interview with police when she was arrested, in which an investigator asked if she had been aware that Tesslynn might die. Stella's response was, "I feared there was a possibility it could happen if it didn't stop. I would have gotten out of there before then." The prosecutor asked Dr. Boyd if Stella's reaction indicated a lack of regard for the value of human life, and the doctor replied, "Her actions certainly showed that. She made a variety of weak or misguided attempts to help her." While she acknowledged that Stella, by her own admission, prioritized drugs and her boyfriend over the well-being of her daughter, Dr. Boyd said that was another symptom of her mental defects. After Dr. Boyd's testimony, the defense rested. The following day, the prosecution gave rebuttal testimony, further refuting the defense experts' opinions about Stella's mental state. On Friday, January 29, 1999, after closing arguments were given by both sides, the jury was given its instructions and excused to deliberate. After the weekend, on Monday, February 1st, the trial ended abruptly in a mistrial after the jury deadlocked. They had deliberated for over 8 hours after more than 3 days of testimony, and at that point a single juror remained convinced that Stella wasn't guilty. In Oregon, on an aggravated murder charge, jurors must agree unanimously to convict. To acquit, at least 10 of 12 jurors must vote for acquittal. In either case, any other jury vote would result in a hung jury. In Stella's first trial, the mistrial resulted from what might have been the first application of a law that was changed in the legislature in 1997. According to Judge Van Rysselberg, the new law tied his hands because it forced deadlocked juries to acquit a defendant rather than considering lesser charges. He said, "The legislature created a conundrum. The result is that if you have one juror out of step, essentially what you've got is a hung jury." After the mistrial, Prosecutor Gorham said that the revised statute was written to avoid juries striking a bargain during deliberations to get the trial over with more quickly, a change in the law that he agreed would likely increase the number of mistrials in the state going forward, although he added, "I think this particular jury would have hung no matter what, so serious were their differences." Stella's second trial began not even 3 months later with jury selection from April 19th through 22nd, 1999. Attorneys for both the defense and the prosecution anticipated it would essentially be a replay of the first trial as far as the content of the testimony given. After 6 days of testimony, on April 29, 1999, the jury was sent to deliberate, and in just 4.5 hours, they returned with a verdict finding Stella Ann Kiser guilty on all counts. Stella's penalty phase began the very next day, although it was derailed somewhat by a defense motion for a mistrial. A week later, on May 7th, the motion was denied, and Stella was sentenced to life in prison for the murder of her daughter. In July of 1999, Stella appealed her conviction. In January of 2001, her conviction was affirmed. Next, it was Jesse Compton's turn to appeal. Death sentences receive an automatic appeal, so on November 5, 2001, Jesse's new attorneys, Deputy Public Defender Mary M. Reese and State Public Defender David Groom, appealed Jesse's conviction and sentence. In the document, they raised 35 assignments of error. In a surprisingly quick turnaround, on February 7, 2002, the Oregon Supreme Court upheld both his conviction and his death sentence, unanimously rejecting several mostly technical arguments on Jesse's part, including complaints about the jury makeup and claims that the initial indictment was flawed. Of course, Jesse's defense team immediately submitted a petition for the decision to be reconsidered, but by the end of March of 2002, the petition had been denied as well. Their next move in May of 2002 was to file a federal petition for writ of certiorari, which is a request that the U.S. Supreme Court order a lower court, whether the trial court or the state Supreme Court, to send up the case for review. This petition was also denied, as was their petition for a rehearing after the fact. The next step in the typically lengthy process of appeals that follows nearly every death sentence handed down in this country was for Jesse's attorneys to file his PCR, or post-conviction relief petition. This process began in January of 2003 and took almost 10 years to slog its way through the courts, between the petition itself being amended and resubmitted 4 more times and multiple changes in counsel over the years. Meanwhile, sadly, on December 6, 2007, Teslynn's paternal grandfather, Kenneth Randall O'Cull, passed away in California at the age of 54. Ken, who was born on March 5, 1953, was buried near his tiny granddaughter in the Desert View Memorial Park Cemetery in Victorville, California. While in prison, both Jesse and Stella somehow managed to convince other people to marry them. Stella married a man named David Lee Kinnart, another convict who was also a sex offender after being convicted of rape in 1988 and sodomy in 1998. I can't imagine why, but Stella filed for divorce from David in 2008. Jesse, for his part, married a woman named Claudia D. Brown in the spring of 2009. I wasn't able to find any information about Claudia, but rumor has it she worked on his case at some point. They were still married in December of 2012 when Jesse's PCR petition was finally denied by Senior Judge Walter Edmonds, but a few months later, in April of 2013, Jesse petitioned for and was granted a divorce from Claudia. Apparently, romance really is dead. At one point, both Jesse and Stella posted ads for pen pals behind bars. I couldn't find a trace of Jesse's, unfortunately, but I found this snippet of one of Stella's ads. I'm looking for a male companion who is stable and knows what he wants, but is also very loving, kind-hearted, honest, and loyal, as I share these qualities. Better yet, I came across one of her full ads on another website, so of course I have to share this with you. Hello there, my name is Stella Ann Kiser. I'm 5'6", 150 pounds, long blondish brown hair and blue eyes. I'm a 31-year-old California native. I'm half German and half Lakota native. I'm a very kind, loving, and gentle soul who's very honest, trusting, sincere, and loyal. I enjoy many things: the beach, beautiful sunsets, watching a good football game and movie, just to name a very few. I don't look up to the rich or down to the poor. Judging people isn't in my hands or heart. I'm a very simple person who just enjoys the simple things in life, and I love writing and getting to know a person and share conversation. I'm very much a sweetheart, but at the same time, I must say I'm a little naughty too. Nothing bad, all good, I promise. So if you're interested in a little naughty and nice, drop me a line. You won't regret it. I don't know why, but I get the feeling he might regret it. Nothing solid, just a theory. Anyway, enough of my snark. Now 46 years old, Stella Ann Kiser, Oregon Department of Corrections SID 1235-2654, is currently serving her sentence of life without parole in the Coffee Creek Correctional Facility in Wilsonville, Oregon. The Oregon Department of Corrections website lists Stella as having brown hair and blue eyes, standing 5 feet 6 inches tall, and weighing 226 pounds. I submitted a request to interview Stella for the podcast, but my request was denied by the facility's public information officer, who, understandably, explained, "Due to the details of the crime, this would compromise the safe, secure, and orderly operation of our facility." In September of 2020, Jesse's Capital Qualified attorneys, Bert Dupree and Kathleen M. Carell, filed a post-conviction relief petition on his behalf in Umatilla Court. I believe this is the appeal on his previous denial for post-conviction relief. In January of 2021, the defense and the state filed a joint motion to delay the proceedings pending a ruling on identical issues by the Oregon Supreme Court, at which point Judge Eva Temple ordered the case held in abeyance. I'll keep an eye on the proceedings and post updates on social media if I see any movement. In the meantime, 45-year-old Jesse Caleb Compton, Oregon Department of Corrections SID 1235-1178, currently awaits execution in the Two Rivers Correctional Institution in Umatilla, Oregon. The DOC website lists him as having green eyes, weighing 180 pounds, standing 6 feet 2 inches tall, and having brown hair, although his prison photo now shows a man with a beard and a shiny bald head. If Jesse's PCR appeal is denied, I believe his final shot at freedom will be to file a federal habeas corpus petition, which is essentially a request for a federal court to review the legality of a person's incarceration under the claim that his arrest, trial, or sentence violated constitutional laws. Expedited habeas corpus procedures are available to death row inmates with capital qualified counsel, which Jesse does have. If a habeas petition is denied, Jesse will have no choice but to wait out his sentence, which may take the rest of his natural life. In other words, I wouldn't hold your breath for Jesse's execution. 4 times over the decades, Oregon has abolished and reinstated capital punishment. Since its most recent reinstatement in 1978, only 2 executions have been carried out in Oregon, the last one being in 1997. There has been a moratorium on death sentences since 2011. Although the state currently does technically have the death penalty, in 2020, the Oregon Department of Corrections announced it was closing Death Row, which was located in a far corner of the grounds of the Oregon State Penitentiary in Salem, and reassigning the inmates who lived there to other locations in the state prison system. The men from death row would be moved into general population, although some would be sent to special housing within the prison system, either because they were dangerous to others or they themselves were especially vulnerable, in part due to the nature of the crimes they committed. Jesse was no doubt one of these. By the summer of 2020, all but 5 of the state's death row inmates had been transferred out of the unit, including Jesse, who was moved to 2 Rivers. Another notable inmate on Oregon's death row was Christian Longo, who was on the FBI's most wanted list in 2001 for the murders of his wife, Mary Jane, and their 3 young children, Sadie, Zachary, and Madison. Christian has since been transferred into general population at the Oregon State Penitentiary. The unit that housed death row would be converted into disciplinary housing for inmates who committed crimes behind bars, such as assault, extortion, gang activity, or other illicit conduct. Annually for the past 10 years, Tesslynn is honored at a local event called the Walk a Mile for a Child 5K, which is organized by a group called Dallas Blue Angels of Lebanon, Oregon. The most recent event, which took place on April 2, 2022, had 269 registered participants and was sponsored by multiple local businesses and individuals. The event raised over $27,000 for child abuse awareness and prevention. This year, the group had a new angel to honor, 7-week-old Sandra Lee, who died of malnutrition in March of 2020. Her parents, Christian Ray Lee and Chantel Ann Marie Swears, were sentenced to 6 years in prison for her death. In her honor, the Lebanon Walmart donated a crib to be filled with teddy bears in honor of little Sandra, and then donated to the Center Against Rape and Domestic Violence. I'll include links to the Facebook page and website for Dallas Blue Angels in the show notes for this episode, because the group is doing great work out there. Its founder, Dalla Johnson, is a longtime member of the Never Forget Tesslynn O'Cull Facebook group. Some sources say that Tesslynn's murder prompted the adoption of tougher child abuse reporting laws, but I wasn't able to find information about any laws that appear to have been inspired, either specifically or generally, by Tesslynn's case. However, it did prompt Lane County law enforcement and child protection authorities to review how they handled child abuse and domestic abuse calls, which is a step in the right direction. According to Lane County Branch Manager for State Child Protection Agency Susie Day, if we can take this terrible loss and turn it into a call to action for the community to save others, at least we have honored her and helped other children. After Tesslynn's death, the Springfield Police Department made an important policy change that now allows them to enter a home without a search warrant when performing community caretaking functions, which are any lawful acts inherent in the duty of the officer to serve and protect the public, such as welfare checks. If Tesslynn Elizabeth O'Cull was alive today, she would be celebrating her 28th birthday on June 8, 2022. She'd have been through elementary school, high school, maybe even college, and she might even have children of her own to care for and protect. Tesslynn was a beautiful, loving 3-year-old girl who enjoyed drawing, and she particularly loved bugs. Anytime she found an insect, she had to show everyone in the house. Her grandpa Ken remembered her as a smiling toddler and a sweet little baby who loved horses, dogs, cats, music, and her bath toys. Her Aunt Karen said Tesslynn was wonderful. She loved life. She loved music. She loved animals. Her favorite toy was a little truck. Now I'm going to play for you my recent conversation with Tesslynn's uncle, Billy Kiser, who is the twin brother of Tesslynn's mother, Stella. Thank you so much for joining me, Billy.
I'm glad to be here.
So I know it's been nearly 25 years since Tesslynn passed away, but as we were saying yesterday, the passage of time can't really take away the pain from something like this. How are you doing now?
I'm doing better. I have kids of my own now. My attention's other places and with them, but not a day goes by I don't think about it. My mom really had a lot to do with it, and the day she passed away is coming up, and her birthday's coming up. So, I mean, this time of year kind of rough.
How long ago did your mom pass away?
In 2011.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so it's got to be tough, I imagine.
Yeah.
Stella had mentioned at trial being abused as a child, and I just wondered if you were comfortable talking about whether that was true or if she had exaggerated for her defense or that sort of thing.
Personally, I didn't see any abuse. I mean, my dad he was a very strict person. When he wanted something his way, it was going to be his way. I mean, I'm not saying we were abused, but he was definitely tough on us. Well, we weren't angels. We were still kids, but we weren't criminals by any means.
And then your dad passed away in 1989?
Yep.
I know she had said that she witnessed that happening. Was that true?
Yeah, she was actually, her and my mom were actually in the house. They were one room away, and there was no door to the bedroom. I was out front, and I heard the gunshot, and they came screaming, running outside.
I'm sorry, that's awful.
Yeah, that was really, really tough. So tough on everybody. And for me to grow up without that father figure, like we didn't really have that. He was the breadwinner. My mom always worked, but he made sure we were all taken care of.
Yeah, that makes it even harder for sure for your mom to be a single parent after that. And you had how many siblings?
I have 2 brothers and 2 sisters. I actually recently just lost my oldest brother 2 days before my birthday.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh my gosh, that's a lot.
Nah, definitely ain't easy.
No doubt. And it just compounds. Are you still in contact with your other sister and brother?
I'm in contact with my brother. We're close. We talk all the time. We're always checking in on each other, making sure we're okay. He's in my kid's life.
That's excellent. And how many kids do you have?
I have 4. One's 22, but then I'm a single dad of a 10-year-old boy, 8-year-old girl, and 7-year-old boy.
Wow, so you've got your hands full.
Oh, yeah. I'm all about family, and we're all real close.
Good, that's awesome. Do you have any contact at all with Tesslynn's older brother, baby Jason?
We're friends on Facebook, but he hasn't been active on it in a while. And I still wish him happy birthday on it, but I haven't talked to him in a while. He's reached out to me, actually wanting to come here and meet me and see me since he's older now, but I haven't had contact with him. It's been over a year now.
So he's still in California?
Yeah, from what I understand, he was living with his grandma.
I was wondering about that, how he's doing. He must be 30-ish, 31, somewhere in there.
Yeah, me too. I wish I'd talked to him or something. I mean, I'm not going to ever give up. I'll never forget him.
And how far apart were he and Tesslynn? It looks like they were a couple years.
A couple years.
They lived originally in California, but when you and your family, a bunch of you moved up to Oregon?
I did. My sister was already here, and I came to visit. I was having some problems because there's lots of gangs, and I was having some problems down there. So I came up here to visit, and I pretty much never left. Completely different here. This was heaven. When I got here, I thought only places like this existed on TV.
Did you grow up was it Ontario, California?
I grew up in Pomona. I lived in Ontario briefly with my mom.
I guess that's where Stella and Jason met, in Ontario?
Yep.
And they were together for a while, a few years at least.
Yeah, they were together a while.
When she decided to move to Oregon, were they broken up, or she just wanted to be closer to her family, or how did she explain that?
From what I got from it, she had to move there just to get away from him. And she just couldn't stay away from him. She really depended on him. She thought the world revolved around him.
So just feeling it was an unhealthy relationship.
Yeah, and it took her to move here to get away from him.
And I'm gathering he didn't want the kids to go with her, but did they both move with her at first?
Yep.
That's what I was kind of wondering. It looked like both kids went with her, and then they visited Victorville for Christmas for a few weeks, and baby Jason stayed behind. Just Tesslynn went back with Stella to Springfield.
Yep.
And after that is when she met Jesse.
Yeah.
So that's when everything went downhill, obviously.
I guess it was good at first, but I mean, it always is.
That's true.
You never really know anybody till you really get to know them.
Yeah, sometimes the mask slips earlier than later, but they only were together for about 6 months. Is that right?
Yeah, they weren't even together long, I don't think.
But they moved in together pretty quickly. And then the drug parties, is that something that was happening that you know of?
I'm not sure. I've never really got involved in the drug scene, so I never really went over there, but I talked to my sister, and I knew people that would talk to them, and it's messed up. Nobody's ever said anything that anything was going on. Nobody mentioned anything. Well, there's something else, too. There was a time when it was mentioned a week before they found my niece. Me, a friend of mine, and the girl I was dating at the time, we went to that house, and I wouldn't leave until the cops checked on her, but they couldn't open the front door because he nailed it shut. And so they broke down a couple boards on the back fence and saw Tesslynn through the back window, and she waved at them, and they took that as she was okay.
That's what I was wondering, is what prompted that call or your contact with the police. So you had heard from Stella and from other people that things were going on.
Yeah, somebody had went over there and said that it wasn't good, that I needed to do something. And then that person told my mom too, and my mom was like, Billy, you need to go over there. And I did.
Okay, and that's when they saw her through the window and she waved at the police.
Yeah, they wouldn't let me anywhere near him, because they said I was just escalating the situation. His excuse that the front door was nailed shut was because I was there. He didn't want me coming in.
Oh, okay. So he was keeping everybody isolated.
Yeah, he tried to make it sound like he was scared. And that was my biggest thing. How you gonna not suspect something? The front door's nailed shut. That's a fire hazard too.
It sounds like the Springfield police didn't know at the time that it was law for them to contact the SCF.
Yes, I just think way more steps should have been taken. It shouldn't have been over in 30 minutes. Like, they should have took their time.
Yeah, definitely.
There was more than one of us saying something too.
Oh, there were. Okay.
Yeah, there was a neighbor lady that was like, hey, you need to go in there and get that little girl. And I don't even know who this lady is. I've never talked to her again, never seen her again since that night.
Well, that was nice that she at least said something, because it was sounding like no one said a peep except for you. And it's, it's really, I know the bystander effect is a real thing, but you really hope that people will say something if they know something's going on. It's just so sad that so many people could have spoken up.
How could you not?
Exactly. If you hear things going on and you hear a baby crying in there, and that's part of the reason I'm doing what I'm doing with this podcast, to raise awareness and make people understand that if you see something, you have to say something. It's our responsibility,
You have to. You never know.
Yeah, exactly. And who would ever want an outcome like that and to feel responsible for it, no less?
You're only the second person I've ever talked to about this.
Really? That's incredible. And I had a blog as well. So I've been doing these sorts of stories for about 3 years. And someone just suggested Tesslynn's story to me a couple weeks ago. I had never heard of it. And now, knowing that she was literally the poster child in Oregon, I'm just so surprised that it's not still talked about. And that's why I felt like, her story needs to be told again, and people need to know who she is.
I agree. That's so awesome. And I appreciate whoever did that.
Yeah, no problem. I do get a lot of stories suggested. Most of them are, current, but I like to make sure that we don't forget the kids who have not been around for a while. It's not like they are less important now.
Absolutely.
They're little people, and she certainly deserved to live past 3.
That's true. She's still always with me.
Yeah, absolutely. you can never forget someone who has this little hold on you, I'm sure she had everyone wrapped around her little finger.
She did. She was so awesome. She was so cute.
Are you still in contact with Stella?
I'm not. My oldest sister is the only one in contact with her. At first I was, but the way she was acting and some of the things that she was saying was like, she thinks, and I've forgiven what's happened, and I'll probably never forgive her for that, and I'll never forget it. And I don't want her to ever think that I will ever forgive or forget that.
Yeah. It must have changed everything that you thought about your own twin.
It did. I was depressed for a long time. I lost my best friend in the whole world. Like, we did everything together. Everything. We grew up together. I mean, we had the same friends. We were always together. She was my twin sister.
Yeah, and then all of a sudden, this guy comes into her life and everything changes.
Yeah, and it really confused me that she never came to me because she told me everything except this. This I never knew.
If Jesse was abusive to her, it's not hard to see how something like that can happen. It's just, it happened so fast with this. It was less than half a year. It went from 0 to 100 and it just had the absolute worst result. It's just so awful. So I do have some sympathy for her in that way. If he was abusive, then it's, you can see how certain things can happen.
I do too. I'm not saying it's all her fault, but she had to know something.
Yeah, it wasn't that big of an apartment, and it sounded like she knew what was going on.
And she was going to classes, leaving my niece there with him. And if she knew something was going on, then that never should have happened.
So she was in school at the time?
Yeah, she was going to mandatory classes through DHS.
Okay, so they were involved.
Yeah, somehow, some way they were involved because she had classes through them.
Did you attend any of the trials or the court hearings or anything?
I did. I was at the trial.
That must have been just awful.
It was. They didn't. I had a choice whether to see the pictures and all that, and I chose not to. I don't know what that would have done. I just know I didn't want to see him.
No, you can't unsee something like that.
You're right. It would have stayed with me forever.
Just the descriptions, I hear these awful stories every day, and still it's like I had to keep looking away. I couldn't stop, just my eyes filling with tears, just hearing about the things that this poor little girl went through. And I have too much empathy sometimes, and I can just imagine, how awful it was for her. Just heartbreaking.
It does. It hurts my heart.
Sure, of course. Yeah, and she's someone you loved and you knew, and it's just, I'm just so sorry that this happened to her and to your family. It definitely divided people, I imagine.
Absolutely, it did.
Yeah, that's another awful effect that it has. But I'm glad you at least have contact with your brother and, that you're happy in Oregon with your kids. That's really good to hear.
To be honest, this situation made me such a better person. It made me a better parent. It makes me more aware of things going on around me, the way I act with my kids. It's changed me. It's sad that it took something like this to make me who I am today, but I'm glad I am who I am.
Definitely. I mean, there has to be some kind of a silver lining that you can get out of a situation like this.
I'm really glad you're doing this too. I am so glad there's people like you out there.
Oh, thank you. I can't let these kids be forgotten. And if we can save one child by sharing one of these stories, it's absolutely worth it. There's too many of these kids enduring this stuff every day. 4 to 7 kids are dying in this country alone every day from child abuse. It's too much.
Well, I didn't know that.
Yeah, that's the problem. I think people really don't. And a lot of people don't want to hear stories like this. They'd rather not know. But if we don't know, I always say, how can we stop it?
That's right. Maybe it'll put that determination or something into somebody to where they might think something's going on and they do react to it now.
Exactly. If you've never seen signs, maybe you don't know what to look for. And some signs maybe just wouldn't seem like it could be abuse. But then once you hear a story where it happened to someone else, you think, okay, I better say something. So it is worth it. It's not let's say, fun or easy, but it's so worthwhile for me to learn the stories. And I take each one of these kids into my heart. I feel like there's a little string attaching my heart to each one of them. They're just so important to me, and I want other people to remember them.
They are, and they'll always be important. Like this story, it should, exactly what you said, it should be told so that it gets out there and people know what to look for. Like maybe, even if you just think something maybe going on.
Yeah, I would say it's definitely better to say something and raise the flag and be wrong about it than not say anything and find out later that the worst possible thing could have happened. So that's kind of what I'm hoping for. But I also, I think it's important to remember each child as who they were. So I always like to ask about them. What do you remember about your niece?
She just loved dolls. She loved being on the swings. She was always so happy, and she loved my mom so much. They were so close. That hurt my mom so bad.
Oh, I'm sure. So she loved her grandma, and I heard she loved boy toys, trucks, and things like that a lot.
Yeah, she liked to play with trucks. I ain't gonna lie. She liked dolls too.
Oh,
She was so happy. We would take her to the park sometimes, and man, she was just always happy.
did she play with her older brother a lot?
Yep, they were best friends.
That must have been hard for him.
It is. I think it really took a toll on him, having his mom and his sister gone.
Yeah. Oh, no doubt. He couldn't have been more than, 6 maybe when that happened?
6 or 7, yeah.
Well, I hope he's, I know his grandpa Ken passed away a while back, but I'm hoping that the rest of the family is at least there for him and he's doing well.
Yeah, now I'm going to try to get a hold of him.
That's awesome. That would be nice. Well, I'm just glad we had a chance to do this and that you're willing to help tell your niece's story because she definitely deserves it. And I'm glad we got to learn a little bit more about her and what a sweet little girl she was, because the few pictures I've seen, she's just captivating. She's just so adorable.
She is. Thank you so much for what you do. I appreciate you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And thank you for talking with me.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much to Billy Kiser for taking the time to talk with me about Tesslynn, how her death affected his family, and his memories of the little girl he loved. Even though this June marks 25 years since Tesslynn's death, we can't let her memory fade. What happened to her is extremely important as a cautionary tale, but it's equally important that we remember her for the loving little girl she was for the 3 short years she spent on this earth. Rest well, Tesslynn. You won't be forgotten. My sources for this episode were the Eugene Register-Guard, the Lewiston Morning Tribune, the Victorville Daily Press, the Never Forget Tesslynn O'Cull Facebook group, the Oregon True Crime and Paranormal Facebook group, American Addiction Centers, Find a Grave, the U.S. Department of Justice, the Lebanon Express, the Albany Democrat Herald, the Statesman Journal, Crime Victims United of Oregon, the Oregonian, the Oregon Justice Resource Center, the Eastern Oregonian, the Oregon State Department of Corrections website, the Oregon State Judicial Portal, the Missing Madeline Forums, Ratterbots, ABC News, the Longview Daily News, the World Newspaper, the United States Supreme Court Docket Search, the Oregon Supreme Court, Dalla's Blue Angels website and Facebook page, Billy Kiser, and court documents. That's it for this week. Join me next week for another episode. If you like the show, please follow or subscribe to Suffer the Little Children on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, Spreaker, Pandora, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, or your favorite podcast listening app. And please leave me a 5-star rating and a positive review on your favorite podcast platform. Visit the website at sufferthelittlechildrenpod.com, where you can listen to episodes or become a patron for rewards ranging from a shout-out by name on the show to bonus content and exclusive gifts. Follow the podcast on Facebook, Instagram, Tumblr, and Pinterest at Suffer the Little Children Pod, and on Twitter and TikTok at STLCpod. View photos related to today's episode on Facebook and Instagram. For more stories like the one you heard today, visit sufferthelittlechildrenblog.com. This podcast is researched, written, hosted, edited, and produced by Lane. All music for the show is licensed from audiojungle.net. Email tips, comments, questions, or case suggestions to sufferthelittlecHildren.pod@gmail.com. For more information about preventing or reporting child abuse, visit childhelp.org or call your area's child abuse hotline. If you see something, say something. Until next week, bye everyone.